Hello, my name is Sasha Struthers. I'm an attorney here in Los Angeles, and I do a lot of videos on property management and real estate. Lately, I've been seeing videos on YouTube that are pretty popular, the one-person business, like the one individual who runs their entire business and has no employees and staff. And there's some pros and cons to that. I'm not going to talk about necessarily that as a business model today, but I want to do a video because I know there's a lot of property managers out there that self-manage their own real estate or a few units, and they don't really have the luxury of hiring someone to delegate work out to. So I thought I would do a video for those individuals and just smaller companies that maybe just don't have a lot of staff and do a lot of stuff themselves, and how they can maybe do things a little bit more efficiently or get, some sort of help in their endeavor of being, the one-person property manager. To begin, I have actually myself managed real estate. I managed about a little over 140 units. It was residential, rent control, and multi-tenant commercial. So I did that managing all those units by myself and working full-time at a law firm. So it is possible. I don't recommend anyone do that. I don't recommend anyone manage that many units by themselves and learn as they go, but you definitely can do it. I have a philosophy, or like my rule of thumb, 150 to 200 rent controlled units, which rent control takes a lot of work. There's a lot of regulation, a lot of compliance. One person can manage up to 200 units. So if you're hiring a property manager company, I always like to see the staff to unit ratio. How many staff members do you have and how many units are you managing as a company? And that's kind of how I guide that. It's not a hard and fast rule. That's just kind of my rule. But it is very possible that one person can manage all that. Granted, it would be full time. Now, for individuals that have maybe a duplex, a triplex, a small apartment building that they don't have staff and they manage it all themselves, it can be overwhelming, especially if you're new to it, you've never had property management experience, and you are likely also having another full-time job doing something, because that's probably what was able to fund your acquisition of this real estate. I will say, before I go into a few tips that I have in this video on what you can implement to help you manage, I will say there's a mindset you have to have when you're managing real estate, which is it's not necessarily passive. It might be passive down the line. It might be passive from a tax standpoint, but real estate is not that passive. And you see a lot of videos about it. People go, yeah, I bought this thing and I put a tenant in and I'm driving a Lamborghini. It doesn't necessarily work that way. It might, but for most people, it's a lot of work. And especially if you're someone in LA, it's a lot of work to manage real estate in LA, especially residential. There's a lot of rules. The rules are constantly evolving. You're governed by a bunch of different governing bodies across the board. So it's hard to keep track of it. And so that's why the one-person business manager, or the one-person, in this case, property manager in Los Angeles, a lot of people buy real estate and then they sell it and they never become landlords again, or they don't grow their portfolio because it is an extremely difficult endeavor to do in a place like Los Angeles. Being a starter landlord in Los Angeles definitely has a huge learning curve. Other places, it's probably a lot easier. It's maybe a little bit different. Huge metropolitan areas tend to have large regulations. They have large barriers of entry to begin with in acquiring real estate. And then there's a lot of rules and regulations on the landlord. So that being said, there's three main things that if you are going to self-manage, I highly, highly recommend you implement. The first one is you should get property management software. Now, this is going to be maybe a big chunk, maybe not a big chunk of your budget, so to say, your mortgage, property taxes, insurance. That's a big chunk of your budget. This may cost you anywhere from a few $100s to maybe a few thousand a year. It depends on who you go with and the pricing plan, but it's definitely something that you should look into. And here's a few reasons why. One, you can process rent collection through there, so tenants can get access to a portal. They can pay online. Tenants can submit maintenance requests online. They can get a lot of property management software has integration with insurance companies, so tenants can buy their own tenant insurance through it and pay the premium through their ledger. So that's really good. So tenants, renters can have renter's insurance, and you usually want to get the tenant to have landlord liability insurance. If something happens, the tenant's own negligence, they damage the unit, they have insurance to cover the landlord. Outside the scope of this video, but you should definitely look into renter's insurance and landlord to liability insurance. 2 different insurances. They have integration for that. You can do your accounting through there, your bookkeeping through there, your reconciliation through there. So you'll be able to see like your profit and loss statements, your delinquency reports. You can make a rent roll that's up to date. You can itemize the charges. So in like LA, there's different kinds of charges. There's rent control charges that are passed through. And then there's your base rent. Sometimes you charge back utilities, sometimes there's parking, there's all sorts of things. So you can itemize those charges within the software. And then you have one clean ledger. I've seen clients who've managed real estate for like 30 years, who all their tenants' ledgers are like on yellow, like legal pads. I don't even use really legal pads. Does it work? I mean, like it does. Is it the most efficient way? Probably not. But you can track a lot in the software. You can make notes to a tenant's file, like, hey, tenant called, they said they're going to be late. Sometimes they have text integration, so a tenant can text something. You can see it on the software rather than maybe seeing it on your phone. You can email notices out through some softwares. The software I like the most, and I've used it, I am not sponsored, though, like, I wouldn't mind to be, but I personally really love AppFolio. Their user interface is very simple to understand. They have a bunch of different reports. They have training videos. They have pretty decent tech support. Their onboarding process, they have a team that helps you onboard. So they, upload your data into the software when you begin to use it. And the dashboard is very helpful. You can kind of get a bird's eye view of what's going on. If you have one unit, maybe you don't need property management software. You probably can manage it through something like an Excel sheet or a Google sheet. But if you have like 2 or more, it may be helpful to have some sort of software, and then you can keep kind of everything in the software. And tenants will always have your phone number if you self-manage. They'll have your email. But a lot of it you could put through the software. You can also pay bills through the software. So there's a bunch of stuff that you can do through the software, and you have like one login rather than a million different logins. And if you plan to, add more rentals or expand your portfolio, it's easy to just add a new building. Definitely there's different features in the software, like, you can have separate bank accounts for each one. So if a tenant could pay online, their rent will go to their specific bank account. You can pay bills out of that bank account for that building, etc. So it makes it easy to separate the accounting in that sense as well. So definitely something that you should look into is property management software. I always tell landlords you should document everything. So in that sense, you can make notes to a tenant's file. If you have a lease and the tenants violate the lease, you can issue out warnings. They usually have templates in there. You can document what part of the lease they violated, what the warning is for, the evidence for the warning, etc. And then you can upload that to the portal. So you can have kind of like a whole file on the tenant in their portal. So if you have, you can upload the lease to it. You can always go to the tenant's file, see their lease. You can see any notices that were issued, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a good place to kind of synthesize your data into one spot. And it just kind of makes it easier to manage. You can create work orders in there. Photos can be uploaded. You can delegate them if you have vendors. You can integrate them into the software as well, delegate work out to them, etc. So definitely has its pros, and that it can streamline a lot of what you're doing. Having post-it notes or your text messages or emails, it does get cluttered. It does kind of get overwhelming, especially if tenants are emailing the same email that you use for work. So it definitely can create some sort of division and separation from like your everyday life or maybe your other work from your property management. Definitely look at software. AppFolio is a good one. Yardi is another one. I've heard of Propertyware. Those are like kind of the 3 main ones I know, but you can also just Google like top property management software and look into them. And usually they have free demos. So you can call them and talk to them about what their software does and does not do. The next one I would say is join a local association. So Los Angeles, there's the Apartment Owners Association. There's the Apartment Association for Greater Los Angeles. Those are 2 main ones here. I know there's national associations that deal with apartments. You should join an association that's local to you. So one that covers your area, because those tend to have a lot of vendors, a lot of the staff, the board. They're dedicated to keeping up to date what's going on locally. They also know a lot about what's going on in the state, but they know what's going on locally. So they usually have a newsletter if there's any updates, any changes in the law, any proposed changes or any proposed laws. They tend to know about it. They keep everybody informed. They also tend to give members access to like webinars, free forms. Some of them have draft leases, things like that. So you get a lot of valuable resources. There's sometimes meetups, networking events, so you can go talk to different people, get to know other landlords similar to you, network in that sense, and just pick everybody's brain. It's really good to have some sort of support system, and those associations tend to have a lot of help. Even if you just have their newsletter, you check out webinars if they post them, which a lot of them do. It's invaluable information for you to keep up to date on what's going on so that you can work towards compliance. And I know everyone has some sort of subscription to some sort of newsletter, so definitely if you join that association and have access to that newsletter, it's probably going to help you be informed and better understand what's going on and what's evolving around where your property's at. And then my last one is have a good lease. This is probably the one I push on with a lot of clients. A lot of them don't have leases, which blows my mind. And then a lot of them have leases and they just like found it online and it's old, it's out of date, it's not applicable to them. I also have clients that tell me like the tenant's violating the lease. And I go, okay, well, let me see the lease. And the lease is completely silent or says nothing about what the landlord is saying the tenant has done. It's like, well, if it's not in the lease, it's going to be harder to enforce it unless it's something, overtly wrong or wrong by statute or something like that. It's going to be hard to enforce it. So you should definitely have a really good lease. Take the time to research them, even have an attorney draft one or review one that you have drafted yourself. Again, associations tend to have some sort of draft lease that's been put together and reviewed, typically by, attorneys that are part of the association. Definitely have an attorney look at it. I mean, you're not your best bet, but like an okay bet is getting a template lease from an association in your area that's familiar with where your property is located. Second would be having an attorney look at it. If there's very specific rules that you have, for your property, that you want to have your property, that you want tenants to abide by, you should definitely put them in the lease. I've draft leases. I tend to make them very long. I tend to add a lot of stuff to them because I just see things that should have been addressed. That's a good thing to put in a lease. There's all sorts of stuff. I also come across a lot of leases. So I like to take notes like, oh, I didn't think about that. That's actually a good clause to have in there. There's, many clauses I've seen, such as like a lease break fee. If a tenant terminates their lease and didn't have a reason to terminate the lease early, there's a clause for that. What are the tenant's responsibilities for their unit? How they're supposed to treat common areas. Is there something specific the tenant should be doing or not doing? You want to definitely put that in the lease and address it in the lease. So those are the three things that I think if you have one rental unit or you have like 100 of them, if you have 100 rental units and you don't have property management software, I would be flabbergasted. But I wouldn't be surprised either. Those are definitely things. Software, join a local association or minimum the newsletter if you can join the newsletter for free, and get a good lease in place and have that reviewed by an attorney ideally. And those three will help you. Definitely self-manage. Also, another thing about the association, if you join a local association, they tend to have a vendor list. I'm sorry that I didn't say this earlier. So if you have a rental and you don't know any vendors, you don't know a plumber, an electrician, nothing, they tend to have a vendor list so that you could go there and at least start there instead of just randomly Googling. You can see those vendors, maybe check them out on the internet, see if they have any reviews, but at least it gives you some sort of a starting point rather than you just blindly trying to go find a vendor having no experience doing that. So that's also another good part of joining a local association. So hopefully those three things are very helpful. If these videos are helpful, please please subscribe. I try to do a diverse amount of videos, some a little more research, some informative like this. So if you're enjoying them, that's great. You can also visit my website and join my newsletter every Sunday. I send out a newsletter, a lot of information, typically about Los Angeles, about California, and the updates going on there. And then I like to give just a general blurb for people who own real estate and tips there. So that's also free, and I like to think very helpful. So with that being said, thank you for watching and have a good day.